Stealth is no doubt a massive component to Star Wars Outlaws, and it's probably the part of the game that players are struggling with the most, especially the areas of force stealth, which I know aren't for everyone. So I've compiled a list of my top stealth tips after more than 40 hours in the game to help you get through even the most tricky situations. This includes some general tips and best practices that the game doesn't really talk about, ways to better utilize Nicks, some of the best skills and abilities, loadout sets you'll want to be sure to grab, and a lot more. So let's get into it, and let's kick it off with the game that I like to call Whistle, Distract, or Attack. Now these three things are basic stealth mechanics that you're introduced to pretty early on in the game, and their uses and general effectiveness are definitely situational. Some of them seem to work better individually, while others actually seem to work better used as more of a combination. Take the whistle for example. Kay has the ability to whistle, which will draw the enemy's attention, but unless you're hiding in tall grass and can get them to move into it where you can attack them, it's not really all that useful unless you're trying to get yourself caught.
Don't try anything!
And then there's Distract. This is where Nicks will run out and cause a distraction, which will cause the enemies to move towards him. But I found that Distract on its own is actually more distracting for me, as I could never really get it to work with any sort of consistency. And again, it usually ended up getting me caught.
Whoops!
But Distract does actually work really well in combination with Whistle. If you whistle first to get an enemy's attention, and then as they move closer to you, have Nicks distract them to draw their attention back out,
Nicks, put on a show.
then you can easily sneak up behind them and take them out. This is a combination that I've used quite a bit and is especially useful in the early part of the game where you don't yet have some of the better abilities unlocked.
Somebody just blasted.
Distract also seems to work really well if an enemy is already suspicious. Once an enemy suspects that you're there, they'll start to move a little bit closer, and if they see you, it's game over.
I'm taking you into custody.
A suspect is reported loose.
Hands behind your head.
But if you can send Nicks out to distract them before they get to you, they'll be sufficiently distracted by Nicks and they'll ultimately leave you alone.
That thing's trouble.
I found this trick to be useful on more than one occasion where I inadvertently alerted an enemy, but then was able to quickly send out Nicks to draw their attention away. Distract is also a really good tool to use when there are cameras, as getting around these are sometimes even trickier than navigating past enemies. If you send Nicks out into the path of the camera, it'll draw their attention away, making it a lot easier to slip by unnoticed. And then finally, there's Attack. I actually found Attack to be more useful than Whistle or Distract most of the time, because it pretty much blinds the enemy, giving you more than enough time to run up to them and take them out. This is super useful in scenarios where you're encountering an enemy far away, because it gives you more than enough time to close the distance without getting seen, and it works really well in scenarios where there are two enemies. You can simply have Nicks attack one of them, and not only will it blind them, but it'll also distract the other enemy, which gives you more than enough time to take out the distracted enemy, and then you can take out the other one before Nicks has had a chance to end his attack. Now, let's talk a little bit more about Nicks, because any successful stealth strategy is really going to rely on getting in the habit of using him early and often. And one of the first things I'd recommend is going into your gameplay settings and turning Nicks prompts off. This is going to eliminate the need for you to have to spam L1 in order for Nicks to take certain actions like triggering detonations. With this turned off, he'll simply do the thing you want him to do automatically, which is really nice and gives you one less thing to have to pay attention to. And once you have that set, I found that the best way to really utilize Nicks is to do some planning and setup before you go into a certain area. For example, you can have Nicks sabotage alarms so that if things do go sideways while you're on a mission and you're discovered, the enemy won't be able to call for help. This can be made even better through an ability you can learn from the slicer called Sneaky Traps, which allows Nicks to trap alarm panels. Not only does this take the alarm offline, but it'll also disable any enemy that goes to trigger it. Now of course, Imperial officers have the ability to trigger alarms at any time with their personal comms devices.
Come in. Ah!
But again, with a little bit of planning, you can have Nicks steal those items from officers before you even head into the area so that they don't have the ability to trigger the alarm and they're basically just left to fend for themselves. And if you're feeling a bit cheeky, Nicks can also steal sniper rifles, which will allow you to just sit back and take out Imperials at your leisure. And speaking of cheeky, there's a skill you probably won't learn until the mid or late game from the expert, the hotfixer, called Cheeky Explosion. I think this is probably the most useful ability in the entire game. Cheeky Explosion will allow Nicks to trigger grenades if an enemy is carrying one. This is an absolutely great ability to have because not only will it take out the enemy that's carrying the grenade, but it'll also take out any other enemies that are within range, and it'll cause a distraction for anyone else in the area, making it much easier to just roam around. This ability basically puts the game on easy mode, as you can pretty much just sit back and send Nicks out to do all your dirty work, so you should definitely prioritize learning this ability as soon as possible. Now, as far as abilities for K go, there are a couple of good all-around ones that I found are pretty helpful for stealth that aren't too hard to pick up early on. Light-footed is one you can get from the Slicer, which is a good ability for stealth because it reduces the amount of noise you make when walking and sprinting. And Scavenger's Footwear is another one you can learn from the Scavenger, which is another good complement to stealth because it increases your speed while crouching, which of course you do a lot when you're just sneaking around. And you'll definitely want to be sure to unlock the Electro Shock Prod, which you can also get from the Scavenger because it gives you the ability to quietly take out elite enemies like droids and some of the later game Syndicate enemies. Now, two other stealth abilities that I'm kind of on the fence about are Fast Talk and Keep Talking. These abilities, which you can learn early on from the bartender, give you a short window of time after you've been discovered to press square, and if you've timed it right, it'll give you a chance to take an action before the enemy is fully alerted. And quick side note, if you don't like having to press square in order to trigger the Fast Talk ability, like the other minigames, you can turn this off in the settings, and when it's off, Fast Talk will automatically be triggered.
This ain't right.
But I've experimented with this ability a lot and have really struggled to find the best way to utilize the skill while still being able to maintain stealth. I think the best way to use it is probably to close in distance with the enemy as fast as possible and then use melee to take them out quietly. But that doesn't really work well when there's more than one enemy around. I've tried using Adrenaline Rush and throwing down a smoke bomb to either take out multiple machines at once or to just slide away unnoticed, and again, neither of those options seem to work particularly well for trying to maintain stealth. At best, I'd say these abilities are more of a last resort or a break in case of emergency situation. But if you have any suggestions or recommendations for how to better utilize Fast Talk, definitely be sure to let me know in the comments below. Now, there are also a handful of Thief Gear loadout sets that you'll want to be on the lookout for that are really helpful in terms of stealth. There are some general Thief Gear sets like the Nar Shaddaa and the Baran Fa, and with these sets, each of the different individual pieces have skills that complement stealth, like the ability to restore health from a stealth takedown or increased crouch movement speed. The earliest piece of Thief Gear I've seen is the Nar Shaddaa Thief Vest, which you can get from the smuggler in the Crimson Dawn base on Toshara, but of course, in order to gain access to the merchant, you'll need to at least have a good reputation with the Crimson Dawn. Which, if stealth is your main focus, I would definitely prioritize working with the Crimson Dawn Syndicate early on and getting your reputation up with them, but more on that in just a minute. The game does also have two superior stealth sets, the Akiva and the Moldor. The individual pieces of these sets also have skills and abilities that complement stealth, but if you equip a combination of 3 pieces from either set, you'll get a set bonus that greatly increases your ability to avoid detection. The skills that you get from the individual pieces in these sets are pretty comparable, so I'd recommend just equipping 3 of the pieces that you're able to find the quickest. And I recently did do a full breakdown on the Moldor Thief set and showed exactly where and how to find each different piece, which I'll link in the description below if you want to check it out. In general, I think the Akiva set is probably easier to get if you're working with the Pike Syndicate, and the Moldor is probably easier to get if you're working with the Hutts. So then in terms of Syndicates, as I mentioned, one of the best Syndicates to work with early if you're focusing on stealth is the Crimson Dawn Syndicate. Once you reach an excellent reputation with the Crimson Dawn, you'll be rewarded with the Crimson Dawn Crest. This is a minor charm that you can equip that increases your ability to avoid detection. And once you've reached peak Crimson Dawn reputation status, you'll be rewarded with the Crimson Dawn Loadout Set. This is sneakily one of the best armor sets in the game, and not only that, but it looks awesome. And come on, let's be honest, if we're not gonna look good while we're sneaking around and stealing from vaults and pummeling Imperials, what are we even doing here? The tunic has an increased ability to avoid detection and gives you a larger portion of adrenaline when you're performing stealth takedowns, and the belt gives you health back when you're performing takedowns, as well as increased grenade carrying capabilities, and the trousers increase your crouch movement speed and increase your adrenaline when sneaking around hostile enemies. So these are all skills that are very complementary to a stealthy playstyle, and why I actually prefer this loadout set over some of the dedicated Thief Gear sets. Okay, and those are my top tips and tricks for stealth in Star Wars Outlaws. But what about you? What are some tips you have for new players, or maybe some strategies that you've found seem to work really well? Definitely be sure to let me know in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe for even more Star Wars Outlaws content. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.